So, you know, I have some difficulties with the definition of fiscal discipline, and I couldn't find a result which could be inserted in a law. You know, the law transfers figures, facts into words. And now, how could I give a definition for those who make the draft for fiscal discipline, where the limits are? Where are the limits? Percents of what? I would say the difficulty is to find limits for a definition. If you don't find clear definitions, then there's a danger, of course, that you have a law, but you can do with what you want. You will have then, that's the second step, you will then have no means for fines, yes, and you have always a parliamentary procedure, because you have to define always, yes, where are the limits actually. Okay. There's a question to you, and then to you. Or to you, and then to you.
So the question is, what are the limits to fiscal discipline? Well, in economic terms, it really depends on the country and its situation. For example, the U.S. doesn't really have any limits to fiscal discipline because the whole world will accept dollars. And so it really doesn't have to worry about the budget deficit. The only limit is if the economy is growing and it causes inflation. But as you can see, we ran some of the biggest budget deficits in the world, and the Federal Reserve created $2 trillion since the recession. They created $2 trillion of money, and still we have no problem with inflation. So now, most countries are not in that situation because their currency is not the reserve currency of the world. So what is the constraint for other countries? For most other countries, the constraint is the balance of payments. In other words, you have to make sure that you don't run out of foreign exchange. And so, but that is the real constraint for most countries in the world. And the problem is, of course, when you have a peg exchange rate, like Latvia does, you are introducing another constraint because you have to worry about maintaining that exchange rate, whereas other countries can allow their currency to fall, and therefore they're not as constrained. So I'm not saying that you should get rid of the exchange. I mean, that's a problem for a long term. That's more of a medium term to long term problem. You don't have to deal with that right now. But I'm saying that is one of the big disadvantages. When you fix your exchange rate, you're introducing a much harder constraint than countries with some flexibility have. And to me, the flexibility is very important. You know, in the media, you have this kind of myth that the most important thing is to keep, and Jan showed that this was not really the cause of any of the crises, except possibly Greece, but most of Europe didn't really have a problem of over-borrowing in the public sector. But that is, in the media, that's the thing you see the most, you know. What are these countries going to do about their public debt? That's how it's described. But that really isn't the main problem, as we've all tried to say. The real problem is policy. You have to maintain a growing economy and employment. That's much more important than the budget balance.
ir par to, ka viņš uzsvēra, ka jautājums ir par to, vai var beigties ārvalstu valūtas daudzas valstī. Un šis jautājums ir svarīgs un Latvijai, kurai ir savu valūta, gan arī tad, kad mēs būsim Eirozonā, mums it kā būs eiro, arī tad mums būs svarīgs jautājums par to, cik mums ir, kā lai to pasaka, latviešu eiro. Tādā nozīmē, ka būs starpība, vai tie eiro piederēs mums un būs mūsu radīta nauda, vai tie mēs būtu aizņemta nauda no citurienes. Un tam ir liela nozīme. Un jautājums ir, kā var tikt pie tādos valūtas, vai kā var pats radīt naudu, kuru varbūt var dot citiem. Un tas ir, ja tu uzbūvē, piemēram, labu eksporta spējīgu rūpniecības sektoru vai rūpniecības pakalpojumu sektoru, kurš ļoti daudz pārdod ārvalstīm preces un vienas atpakaļ valstī valūta. Un vienlaikus tu dabū to, ka neienāk ārvalstu spekulatīvais kapitāls iekšā valstī. Un tās ir varbūt tās tie veidi, kādā skatīties. Tā kā es uzsvērtu šajā visā, tad valsts ir ilgspējīga. Pirmām kārtām tā, ja viņa uzbūvē ilgspējīgu reālo sektoru, ilgspējīgu ražošanas sektoru, tad arī valstī rodas daudz mazāk ierobežojumu pēc tam savā fiskālajā vai monetārajā politikā. Te, ja, piemēram, eksports imports ir līdzīgi, vai mēs importējam vairāk kā eksportējam, mēs vienmēr būsim ļoti ierobežoti valūtas apjomā. Tas būs neatkarīgi no tā, vai mēs būsim Eirozonā vai nē, jo eiro nav, it kā ir un it kā nav būtu tas pats eiro visās valstīs vienlaicīgi. Savukārt jautājums varbūt tiešām bija baktis, man gribēja jautāt atpakaļ, jo tajā pašā pētījumā, kuru uzrakstīja Bakers un Gulda, Starptautiskā valūtas fonda misiju vadītāji Latvijā un citās valstīs, viņi rakstīja, jā, viņi saka, pirms šī burbuļa 2007. Gadā notika tās, ko ekonomikas teorija it kā paredzēja, kam būtu jānotiek kapitāls plūda no bagātajām valstīm un nabagajām valstīm. Vai mums par to bija jāuztrauc vai nē, jo it kā labi, ja mēs dabūjam naudu no bagātajām valstīm. Un neviens noteikti tajā laikā nevar iedomāties, ka krīzes cēlonis varētu būt rietumu bankas. Tā nebija diskusija vispār, tas nebija lielā mērā neiedomājami daudziem. Protams, bija, es runāju par to Rubīniju un citi, bet daudzi par to nedomāja, jo teorija bija, ka rietumu bankas stabila sistēma un mums nebūtu jāstrauc par to, ka teikšana pārdot no kredītiem būtu. Lūk, mēs uztaisījām burbuļu. Kā likumdošanā, mans jautājums, kā likumdošanā var vispār ierakstīt iekšā kaut kā šādu fiskālās disciplīnas likumu, kas ņemtu vērā to, ka var valstī ienākt ļoti daudz privātās spekulatīvās naudas un veidot par valsts budžetu tādu, lai tas būtu sabalansēts. Vai tas ir iespējams?
The more I hear these comments, the more I'm convinced you can't get it into a law. You can write into a law certain benchmarks, and you can say, despite this, in extraordinary times, I would say with my words, extraordinary times, it's up to the government to submit to the parliament plans where to invest, what to finance, and so on and so on. But I'm also convinced that a firm and immobile debt break will harm to the country, to each country, because no government can foresee what will happen in 2 years, in 5 years, and then it will be very difficult to reduce the strict lines.
Mark, can I get you to comment on Do you think that the European Union has done the necessary steps now to contain this crisis? What is your view on that?
Yes, no, I don't think they've come close yet. And that's why, you see every time the European authorities or heads of state or ministers get together and they come up with a proposed solution and the markets rally and then 2 days later it looks like it's a mess again. And that's because they're not dealing with the main problems. As I said before, they have not proposed a solution for Greece that would prevent a chaotic default. Okay, there's going to be a default of some sort because that's what a haircut is. You're not paying half the debt, so you can call it a restructuring, but it has to be something that avoids a chaotic default. The second thing they have to do is to guarantee the Spanish and Italian bonds, because that is, as I said before, what is causing the crisis is the fear that those bond yields will rise further and cause further financial havoc in the European banking system. And they haven't come close to doing that either. And the third thing they're going to have to do is reverse their macroeconomic policies to allow Greece and the other peripheral countries, and indeed the whole Eurozone economy, to grow its way out of the crisis. And they're not doing that either. They're still pushing Italy, for example, in the wrong direction. So until they resolve those three things, I think you will see. I'm not, by the way, I'm not one of these people who predicts disaster or that the euro is going to fall apart. I think they will eventually do what they need to do. To me, the tragedy is that it's taking so long, and there's definitely a risk that it will lead to a real collapse. I don't think that's the most likely outcome, but it is a real possibility. And the fact that but I think it's important to remember that it isn't just avoiding a collapse that they need to do. They need to do something about the 23% or 22.6% unemployment in Spain and the horrible social cost, the generations that are losing out of their opportunities to have a normal life. That is what they have to do, and they're just very far from doing that as well.
Piebilstot tiem Mārta teiktām, jautājums par bezdarbu ir ļoti svarīgs. Un ekonomikā ir novērots, ka bezdarbs krītas apmēram par 1%, un ka ekonomika aug apmēram par 3,5%. Un tās, ja augot ātrāk, jau bezdarbs sāk justies vairāk. Bet ja mums ir tagad tik liela bezdarbbi perifērijas valstīs un arī Baltijā, mums ir jāpadomā, kāda izaugsme mums ir nepieciešama, lai mēs nodarbinātību atjaunot normālā līmenī. Un nav normāli, ja nav cilvēkiem pieejams darbs un darba vietas. Tas nav normāls. Tā kā viņā nav normāli 21. gadsimtā, kad mums ir visas tehnoloģijas, visas iespējas, visa bagātība, labi dzīvot, tik tādi. Un mēs nevaram nodrošināt darba vietas. Tā nav normāla situācija. Bet, lai mēs atgrieztos normalitātē, mums ir nepieciešama daudz straujāka izaugsme, bet kā mēs varam dabūt strauju izaugsmi, ja mums ir jātaisa budžeta griezumi. Un te mēs nonākam strupceļā, no kura esošās politikas ne Eiropā, ne Latvijā nav laba atbilde.
Paldies, vai diskusijas var dalībnieki ziņotājiem ir vai jautājumi viens otram, vai es gribētu savā starpā vēl kaut ko, kādu jautājumu uzdot. Ja nē, tad es pārēju pie nākamā mūsu konferences posma. If there are any questions to ask to the participants of the handle?
No, I'm okay.
So, labi, nākamais un pēdējais posms varbūt ļoti interesants tiem saprotam. Es tad gribētu pirmām kārtām dot iespēju uzdot jautājumu fonda pārstāvniecības vadītājiem Bilsekungam, ja viņš pacēlis roku jau sen. Lūdzu, Bilsekung. Starp citu, kamēr viņš klausās tulkojumu, es gribētu pateikt vienu tikai ziņu paziņojumu, ka jautājumu arī var uzdot krievu valodā, pēc tam jautājums būs uzdots tulkots latviešu valodā un pēc там angļu valodā. Вопрос можно задавать на русском языке, он будет переведен на латышский язык, потом на английский. Thank
you, Mr. Chairman. Questions is a difficult thing. Let's discuss it a little bit. Let's be a little bit also open, really open. If we had, ministers like Vice Pro, we shouldn't care about the European future. I mean, we know already. I mean, economists know what has to be done. The problem that I see is that nobody knows it, that nobody has an idea that they are in a dead end, in the end of a road. They don't know how to get out of it. And the European governments, I'm not talking about the European Union, because it's easy to put the blame on the European Union as such, and I appreciate very much Professor Hafti's remarks about the possibilities to make it useful for you to get out of the traps. But the Europe is in a trap, and it has reasons. Because, and they admit it, they know it. Mark, they know it. They know that they have no common fiscal policy, that they have no common economic policy. I'm not talking about foreign policy because it's too easy to blame it. But they know it and they have problems with it because they could not come to an agreement. I remember very well the time when I was in Brussels in the beginning of the 90s when it was decided to have a common currency. Everybody said this is the end of the Union. This is the end of the individual states that will be dominated by Germany and so on and so forth. There will be the end of it. And they found a solution, but the solution was a provisional solution. I very, very well remember that the European Union had sworn in that we would create also, beside the economic currency union, a political and an economic union. So they have to do their homework, and we are amongst them. We are part of it. I can just ask your government to remind the governments, their colleagues, their neighbors, on their promises. I think, and I believe, I don't know, that might be a solution to be more open to the others. Then you can find also economic recipes to get out of the present crisis. The second thing I would like to mention, I'm sorry that I'm commenting, but questions are so easy to answer. Comments are more difficult sometimes. The second thing I'd like to say is we have left out a number of criteria that we should have discussed as well in this circumstances. This is, for instance, the question of the role of the international financial markets. I haven't heard any remark about it. Not the economists say anything. Please tell me a little bit about your perception of the role of the international markets. Perhaps it is nothing. The third remark is, what about inner reforms? What about the question of corruption? What about the question of tax reform? What about the question of in all the countries referred. And I would be very careful to make a judgment about Greece. Greece is a very, very difficult case. It's not so easy to answer. Nor there was the safeties action was kind of successful, unquote. But Greece's problems are more structural. Greece's problems are more historical. Greece's problems are deeply rooted, like maybe your problems as well here. So be very careful to say, well, Greece should just get some investments and they will get out of the trap. Do you know that the Greek experts, that Greek scientists, that Greek doctors have been the most successful doctors, scientists, and experts outside Greece since decades. So they've always had the chance to get out and to come back. This has to do something with the structure of the families, of the small and medium enterprises, and so on. So this is a long, long story. I just want to warn, be careful with Greece, be careful with Iceland, with this was completely bankrupt, completely. But I'm getting into other areas now, but this is an area which belongs also to the fiscal policy debate. I'm sorry to extend the time, but I was quiet all this time. Thank you very much.
Es vismaz atdzirdēju 3 jautājumus, vai ne? Es ceru, ka Marka, Jānis un Kristiāna arī saprata jūsu jautājumus, bet es arī lūgtu citus dalībniekus uzreiz paiet pie jautājumiem, lai katram citam dalībniekam būtu iespēja uzdot. Bet pagaidām mēs gaidīsim atbildēs uz jautājumu, ko uzdevam jums, ka viņš tomēr ir mūsu patrons, mūsu konference. Lūdzu, kāds no ziņotājiem atbildēs? Varbūt Marks sāks.
Okay, well, these are big questions. On Europe, I guess, there's been a lot of emphasis on the policy, the difficulties of coordinating policy in the European Union, which is what Mr. Bunz was referring to, and not knowing what to do. But I think that's somewhat exaggerated. I think it's more a problem of the European Central Bank and the European authorities doing the wrong thing. And, we just had more than 20 members of the German parliament came to our organization during the IMF meetings in September to discuss these issues. And they were from all the major political parties in Germany. And we had a long discussion with them, and I got the impression that they understood that the policies that the European authorities were pursuing were wrong, but they felt politically they didn't know what to do about that. So I think it's a political problem. I think economists have known some of the things that we need to know to resolve these problems for more than 60 or 70 years. And the problem is really political. I mentioned the things that need to be done. The 3 things that I thought need to be done: the Greek debt restructuring, the change in the macroeconomic policy, and the guaranteeing of those debts of Italy and Spain. I mean, I think that should be obvious to most economists, and yet they're not doing it. So it's a lack of political will, and I don't think it all just boils down to, Germans not wanting to bail out Greece, or the kind of things that you read about. I think you have this problem that the European Central Bank is a kind of an extreme ideology. It's way to the right of the U.S. Federal Reserve, for example, which is headed by a Republican, and is not a particularly liberal institution. And yet, you see the European Central Bank is so far to the right of the Federal Reserve in our country that it's almost like 2 completely different kinds of institution. I mean, our Federal Reserve lowered interest rates to 0 in December of 2008, and has kept it there and pledged to keep it there for years, and has created $2 trillion. The European Central Bank raised interest rates twice in the last couple of years, and even in this crisis is not yet committed to lowering from their short-term rate. And they're not talking about anything like the quantitative easing, the creation of money that the Federal Reserve did. So you see they're very, very extreme in the world of even, I would say, even the world of central bankers, which is a world that I think is often not concerned about employment. So this is an institutional and political problem I don't think it's a problem that we don't know what to do, or economists don't know what to do. I think there are solutions that are not even that difficult or painful. Okay, the second thing, maybe that was too long. I'll make the other one short. What is the role of financial markets? And we haven't said anything. A very good point. I mean, if you look at the crisis in Europe, look what happened in July when the crisis got really bad and the Italian 10-year bond rates shot up over 6%. And what was going on there? Well, part of it was the European Central Bank. Again, they said, we're not going to buy Italian or Spanish bonds. And then they backed off when the crisis hit. They said, okay, we'll do it. And this has been going on for 2 years now, right? Almost 2 years, is the European Central Bank and the authorities, they push the situation to the brink of a collapse, and then they do what they said they weren't going to do. Okay? They did that, several times they've done this already. Why are they doing this? Well, that's a more difficult question, which I could answer if you're interested. But the point is, the markets were playing a very bad role too. There were actual quotes from traders in the newspapers in July where they said, look, we're going to push those bond rates all the way up to 7%, and that's how we're going to make a fortune here. And, I say we can do it. That's what the trader said to Reuters, to the news agency. So they were deliberately trying to create a crisis in order to profit from it. And this is a problem. Not that they should be sent to jail for this, but the problem is that we should have regulations that make it more difficult for them to do that. And as regarding the structural problems in Greece, I completely agree. The main structural problem in Greece is that rich people don't pay their taxes, and the government doesn't collect them. And unfortunately, the IMF and the European authorities haven't really done that much about that. But that is what needs to be fixed mainly, and I don't think it's that difficult or unsolvable. But again, that's a longer-term problem. The main problem in Greece is that they have their policies going in the wrong direction. They're shrinking. They're trying to shrink their way out of the debt crisis, and that's making it worse.
Prezidentam Clintonam bija tās politiskais padomnieks Džeims Kārdels, un viņš vienreiz teica, ja būtu reinkarnācija, es vēlētos atgriezties atpakaļ uz šīs pasaules, varbūt kā pāvests, vai varbūt kā prezidents, vai varbūt kā beisbola supersitējs. Bet es tā padomāju tagad, es gribētu atgriezties atpakaļ kā valsts obligācija tirgus. Var iebaidīt visus. Un es domāju, ka tā ir problēma, ka valsts, vai šī gadījumā īpaši Eiropas centrālā banka, nerīkojās droši ejot uz priekšu un droši paņemot vadību par to, kādā veidā norisinās tirgus apstākļi, gan tajā, kad pilnīgi un skaidri, piemēram, pateikt, to, ko viņi naudu beigās izdara, kad uzpērk šīs valsts obligācijas neierobežotos apjomus un viss. Vairs grūti ir spekulēt par to. Vai, piemēram, ka valsts neizdara kaut ko Markus pieminēja, lai samazinātu šīs spekulācijas. Eiropa tagad dara dažas lietas, bet tas ir lēnām. Un es domāju, ka tas ir tiešām nepieciešams, un mēs dzīvojam laikmetā, kurā es domāju, ka valstī un valsts institūcijām ir jāuzņemās vadība pār tirgu, nevis jābūt iebiedētām. Un tā ir faktiski tāda fundamentāla problēma, jo mēs lasām, tirgus domā tā, ko mēs tagad darīsim, mums tur reitings nav vai tas, bet kas ir tirgus? Tie ir puikas, 30 gadiem, kas spekulē bankās, mums viņi ir jāklausās. Tas, man liekas, ir fundamentāli nepareizi. Mums ir jāpārņem vadība un jādara lietas pareizā veidā. Bet, protams, tam ir citas sekas un cilvēki to nedara.
Paldies. Jautājums. Es gribēju jautājumu jums, pēc tam pēc kārtas. Kur ir radio mikrofoni lūdzu? tikai viens, bet divi. Un varbūt arī nosalasiet vārdu un uzvārdu.
My name is Carlos Bauza from Central Bank of Latvia. I have one question to Mr. Westbrook and a couple of questions to Mr. Borschlet. First is to Mr. Westbrook. You mentioned a couple of times in your speech that at the moment it's very important at what rates governments are able to finance themselves in the national market. And it is a very topical issue, and particularly at the moment when globally the shift of paradigm, everybody is risk-averse. No one is ready to finance countries on the same grounds as before. And that's probably one of the reasons why Italy is in big problems at the moment. So from your perspective, if you are advocating for expansion in fiscal policy, how with expansion in fiscal policy you would be able to decrease borrowing rates for the government? That's one question. Un vēl divi jautājumi Boršlekungam. Pirmkārt, Boršlekungas prezentācijā parādīja viņa prāta, teiksim, iemeslus krīzei, un tie iemesli bija tādi, ka fiskālā politika un budžeta deficīts nebija problēma. Es domāju, es nevarētu noteikti piekrist šai lietai, jo tā bija viena no galvenajām problēmām. Bet otra lieta, ko Boršlekums pieminēja, bija tas, ka bankas to strauji kreditēja. Jā, tā tiešām bija viens no iemesliem, kāpēc izveidojās šie burbuļi. Bet es kategoriski negribētu piekrist apgalvojumam, ka Latvijas banka pie tā bija vainīga, jo slaidā bija skaidri un vienkārši parādīt, ka Latvijas banka pie tā ir vainīga. Es gribētu atgādināt, ka Latvijas banka ierosināja 2005. gadā pretinflācijas plānu, kas galvenokārt ietvēra pasākumus, kas bremzētu šo kreditēšanu. Tā viena lieta vienkārši korekcija, lai nebūtu pārpratuma. Un otra lieta, ko es gribētu, fiskālās atbildības likums. Boršlekums pieminēja, ka viņš atbalsta šo te finanšu spilvenu, un fiskālās atbildības likums pilnībā to noraidīs. Es gribētu teikt otrādi. Ja mēs akceptēsim fiskālās atbildības likumu, tad nākotnē mēs spēsim izveidot to finanšu spilvenu. Tā kā, manuprāt, tā bija tāda nedaudz, varbūt pārpratums no manas puses. Paldies.
Tad par slaidu par to, kāpēc Latvijas banka ir vainojama par kreditēšanas pieaugumu. Un es atsaucos uz pētījumu šeit, kuru bija veikts Vakars un Gulba. Un tas, ko viņi pētīja, bija kredīta apjoma pieauguma dažādās Austrumēropas valstīs un 2004. gadā. Un politikas, ko varēja darīt. Latvijas banka ierosināja mīkstu likumu pretinflācijas plānām, kurš tika pieņemts novēlot. Likums bija, vājš, jebkurā gadījumā, bet pat, ja viņš būtu bijis labāks, mums ir piemēri. Mums ir piemērs Bulgārija. Bulgārija ļoti intensīvi strādāja pret to, lai Rietumu bankas palielinātu kreditēšanas apjomu. Piemēram, Bulgārija noteica maksimālos apjomus, kurus Rietumu banku filiālis drīkst izsniegt Bulgārijā kā kredītus. Rezultāts? Labākie klienti tika pārcelti uz Grieķiju, tāpēc, ka tās bija Grieķu bankas, kas strādāja Bulgārijā tajā laikā. Un faktiski, piemēram, ar šādu metodu neko tās nevarēja izdarīt. Problēma ir, ka Bulgārija darīja vēl vairākus ļoti interesantus soļus, iesaku interesantiem iepazīties to pētījumu, ļoti interesanti, daudz darīja. Bet problēma ir, ka pie mūsdienu kapitāla mobilitātes ir grūti kaut kādā veidā apstādināt šāda veida darbības, ja cilvēki to grib, viņi uzskata, ka tas ir saprātīgi, ja bankas uzskata, ka tas ir saprātīgi kreditēt eiro. Un tādēļ, ka pretinflācijas plāns Latvijā neizdevās šī iemesla dēļ, jo viņš ietvēra faktiski tādus mēģinājumus kaut kā to bremzēt, gan arī Bulgārijā un citās vietās viņš iznācās. Un tas, ko saka Vakars un Gulba, ir sekmīgas politikas bija tikai tur, kur cilvēki neizvēlējās ņemt kredītus ārzemju valūtās. Un tas notika valstīs, kurās valūtas kurss svārstījās, līdz ar to baidot cilvēkus ņemt šādus aizņēmumus, tāpēc, ka viņi apzinājās, ka pastāv valūtas kursa maiņas risks. Un šādā nozīmē Latvijas banka ir vainīga. Viņi, protams, nav vainīgi tajā nozīmē, ka mēs nedomājam neviens tajā laikā, ka būs tik liela krīze, arī es nedomāju. Un arī Latvijas banka nedomāja, un arī Bakers un Gulda uzsver, ka ļoti daudzi domāja, ka šis ir dabisks konverģents process, kas norisinās un tā. Bet ja mēs atskatāmies atpakaļ tagad un analizējam to, kas ir noticis, un tiešām mēģinām saprast, kuras valstis bija sekmīgas, kuras nebija sekmīgas, kāpēc pikas valstis ir šobrīd nonākuši finanšu grūtībās. Mums ir par to jādiskutē un jārunā, un es domāju, ka ļoti skaidri redzams tas, ka problēmās un grūtībās ir nokļuvušas valstis, kuras ļoti lielos daudzumos no ārvalstīm saņēmuši kredītus. Un tas pat nav nekas jauns, ja mēs paskatāmies, tāpat tās Boris kungs noteikti zina, Rogopa grāmatu, šis laiks ir savādāks. Ļoti ārvalstu profesori plaši pētījumi par to, kāpēc valstis bankrotē vai kāpēc valstīs finanšu krīzes. Galvenais cēlonis, protams, ir pārāk straujā ārvalstu naudas ieplūde kredītveidā. Tas ir tā klasika. Un tad viss jautājums tikai par to, kā tas tiek bremzēts. Un tas, ko es mēģinu teikt, ir, ka valdībai bija daudz mazāk praktisku darbarību. Un tas, ko es mēģinu teikt, nekā centrālajā bankā, tas, ko es mēģinu teikt, ka tajās valstīs, kur centrālā banka uzņēmās aktīvu politiku, aktīvi strādāja pret kredītu burbuļiem, šīs valstis pēc iestāšanās Eiropas Savienībā, šīs Eiropas valstis ir bijušas daudz sekmīgākas. Un tādā nozīmē, ka Latvijas banka ir atbildīga pie šīs krīzes. Un otrs jautājums, par ko Bauzes kungs runāja, bija par finanšu spilvenu ar domu, ka ja mēs veidosim atbildīgus budžetus, tad izveidosies šis finanšu spilvens. Es mēģināju teikt, ko citu, es mēģināju teikt, krīzes laikā tiešām ir ļoti ērti, ja valstī ir pieejams fonds, no kura viņa bez griešanās pie finanšu tirgiem var vienkārši sākt tērēt. Tāpēc, kad mēs dzirdējām kritiku no Beizgrupta kunga, no manis par finanšu tirgiem, viņiem šodien ir tāds viedoklis, Latvija ir brīnišķīga, 2007. gadā mūsu CDS bankrota mērvienības bija zēmas, kredīta reitings teicams, 2008. gadā ir pilnīgi pretējs viedoklis, ne? Kas mainījās? Pagāja gads, ne? Tas... Un mēs nevaram neko aizņemties, mums jāir Starptautiskā valūtas fonda, bankas nevar dabūt kredītus, ko izsniegt tālāk, ekonomika bremzējās. Protams, ka tas nav tā normāli, tāpēc tāds finanšu drošības stūlens ir saprātīga lieta, un mēs viņu varam izveidot, bet mēs varam vienkārši aizņemties naudu, izveidot šādu te fondu, kurš stāv, mēs maksāsim par aizņēmumu, bet iegūsim peļņu no tā, ka mēs to nav kaut kur ieguldīsim. Mums tā laikā mums šeit nav stāvēs. Un tādā nozīmē ir ērti, ja nav finanšu disciplīnas likums, tāpēc, kad īsti pirms krīzes centrālā banka, piemēram, var saredzēt, kad mums būs nepieciešams šāds te fonds, viņi var saredzēt, ka drīz būs liela krīze, un Bauzes kungs, es pārliecināts, tas ir valdības vadītāji, viņi sarunāt, izdot jaunas obligācijas ārā, kamēr vēl laiks ir labs, un nolikt viņus speciālā fondā, un mums būtu nauda, no kuriem saņemties. Bet tas nozīmē, ka tajā konkrētajā gadā mums būtu palielinās budžeta deficīts.
Make your response.
Okay, so the specific question is just if the government were to have an expansionary fiscal policy, right, how can they finance that? Because borrowing difficulties, correct? Okay. First, I mean, you don't need as much of an expansionary fiscal policy now as you did when the economy was shrinking. The main thing is to avoid, is to increase the rate of growth and increase employment, especially. But if you're going to, for expansionary fiscal policy, that is, if you want to have the government stimulate the economy through spending and tax reduction, some combination. You don't need to borrow foreign, you don't need foreign borrowing for that. You can do that through domestic, because you don't need foreign currency for that. You can do that with domestic borrowing, or a combination of domestic borrowing and the creation of money, which is what we've done in the United States. And so the constraint, as I was saying before, is that the only time you run into a foreign exchange constraint is if the economy grows faster, as it's starting to grow now, and imports increase. And then if imports increase a lot, then you have a balance of trade deficit and potentially a current account deficit. So having an expansionary fiscal policy does not require you to borrow internationally necessarily. And in fact, governments can also limit their imports. There are ways that are within the rules of the WTO that you can limit imports. To give you an example, Ecuador has done that in the last few years. They have a big problem. They have the dollar as their currency. And Rafael Correa is president. He's a good economist. He knows that they don't want that. You can't get rid of the dollar now because it's too hard, just like it would be hard for you to do to get rid of the fixed exchange rate. It would be even harder for them to get rid of the dollar. And so even though he knows it's not good for the country to have the dollar, he still has to deal with it. So what they did was when they started to run into these constraints of foreign exchange, because they can't create dollars, they limited their imports through a variety of ways that were legal within the World Trade Organization. And if you saw that graph that I put up about showing the recovery in the last 4 quarters, imports have rebounded enormously, and that's a potential problem. So it's something to think about if you do run into a foreign exchange constraint.
My question is more of legal nature, so it's probably to Professor Hafke. The problem with Latvia's now the current how we are currently thinking of fiscal discipline, in my mind, and targeting putting these regulations into our legislation, even into our constitution, is that we are seeing it as something one. Yeah? But if we are looking back to the crisis, then the crisis was not about economy as such, but it was about financial economy. It was about too much financial economy and insufficient real economy. So if we are doing legislation like fiscal discipline for all the economy, yeah, then I think it is wrong. And if we are not distinguishing the investment. Excuse me, to my mind, if we put into the legislation constraints for the financial economy, it is good, yeah, because financial economy created this crisis. But we don't need any constraints for the real economy, which the state has to invest into infrastructure, into education, and into medicine, and so on. Thank you.
Yes, there's nothing to be added. I agree totally. But we talked only about the actual legislation on the public budget, on the government budget. And my firm opinion is that however you define now the needs to manage the budget due to the rules of financial discipline, you must always keep in mind that you must have a door to be opened in situations when you can't stick to these very firm limits being given for normal times. You must open the door for, as I said, they have it also done, and they are discussing this in Germany concerning the financial crisis. That was not an earthquake, it was an earthquake on the financial market. That was a consequence that the government had to spend billions to the banks, that it had to take over one bank, which makes today still troubles. But that is deemed in the public discussion on debt brake as a very special event, which is not comprised by the normal wording of the draft of a law on financial discipline. We must have for this country, or you should take care for your country that you have also such an exit door for cases which one cannot consider, or for a situation which is so enormous and so extraordinary that you can't actually not know what to do with it. That is the actual economic situation. That was my proposal. Thank you very much.
Labdien! Es runāšu latviski. Mani sauc Friedricha, es esmu Baltijas saules fonda priekšsēdētāja. Un mums ir risinājums, kā sakāt. Jūs no sākuma ļoti sirsnīgi pateicāt, ka nebija tikai jautājumi, ka mums visiem ir kompetence. Un mēs esam jau daudz dzirdējuši šo cilvēku viedokli, un viņi arī paši pateica, ka viņiem it kā nav risinājumi, bet šeit viņš ir. Var sakot, mēs esam ierāmēti fiskālajā un monetārajā politikā, un to viss kungi ir viens prāts. Un mums vajadzētu kaut kā citu rāmi atrast, kas mūs apmierina. Un ar to mēs nodarbojamies, veidojot valsts saules modeli, kas ir zinātnisks instruments. Un pie kā mēs sapratām, tagad Zinātņu akadēmijā mums arī bija zinātnes politikas sesijā ievada prezentācija, mēs secinājām, ka nepietiek nec ar centrālbanku vai valdību. Nepietiek arī ar zinātniekiem. Ir vajadzīgs vēl tautas dzīves ziņas, kontroli pār sistēmu, pār šo rāmi. Ja? Un īpaši latviešiem mums ir kolosāli tautas dzīves ziņa. Un mums vajag sadarboties, lai viņu aktivizētu. Ja? Jo problēma sakne, jūs sakat, viņi ir politikā. Bet politikai nav risinājumi. Ja? Tātad mums jāiet pie mūsu tautas. Un tautas šeit atkal šī rāmī, arī šajā sapulcē, nav reprezentēta. Ja? Un mums ir ārzemju fonds, kurš šeit šo pasākumu organizē. Tautai nav līdzekļi. Ja? Tur mums atkal jārunā ar centrālu banku. Ja? Kāpēc šeit tauta neorganizē šo konferenci, tas mums ir jāizmaiņa. Ja? Bet es vēl pievērsīšu uzmanību tam, kad es arī piekritu Ošlei šim komentāram par to, ka centrāla banka ir lielā mērā vainīga, vai, protams, arī valdība ir, bet ir tomēr arī krimināla procesa bijuši. Ja? Tieši par tēmu, ja? Jo kas tad ir sakne šai rāmju problēmai? Sakne ir tā, ka 93. gadā Latvijas centrāla bankas valde pieņēma vienu kriminālu lēmumu, kurš joprojām nav izmeklēts. Kad 8% centrāla bankas noguldījumi tika patēcīgi par nulli. Tad radās viss šī domino efekts ar banku krīzi, ar ārzemju banku ienākšanu un kolonizatīvo procesu. Tātad mums vajadzētu sadarboties, ja? Lai viss šīs nekārtības mēs varētu novākt un izveidot vienu labu rāmi.
Es patīros par ziņojumu, bet arī par jautājumiem, kas tāpēc mēs atzīsim. Lūdzu, jautājumus. Runājot.
My name is Igoru working for the political group in the European Parliament. I have a question for my Westbrook. Well, you know, like currently in the news, you can constantly read that there's articles from many central bank economists about the need to consolidate our budget, how having budget surplus is the best thing ever, and the only thing that pretty much matters. I think my question is, does having an independent central bank as we have here in Latvia is for the benefit of the people?
Well, you know, there are degrees of independence of central banks, and the conventional wisdom among the media and economists, a lot of economists, is that more independence for the central bank is better. I don't agree with that. I don't see a rationale for it at all, actually. You know, you have an argument for an independent Supreme Court, for example, the idea that the court must interpret the laws and must be independent from politics in order to do that. But I've never seen a real argument for the central bank independence. It's basically an elitist argument. It's saying that monetary policy is too important to be left to the people and their elected representatives. And you could say the same thing about budget policy or foreign policy or any other policy. There's nothing distinguishing monetary policy from other important policies that affect the life and welfare of a country. And so it is really fundamentally an anti-democratic argument. It's just saying that we cannot allow the people and the people's representatives to have input into the central bank decision-making, and I think that's wrong. So what it does, and this is a major problem in the world, and that's why I hope you'll excuse me if I go on for another minute, but this is one of the reasons why you've had so much economic failure since 1980, really, in the world. If you look at the world economy, you look at the vast majority of countries, they grew much slower from 1980 to 2000 than they did in the prior 20 or 30 years. And that was because, partly, because central banks had more say, and when you have the central banks making the decisions, they tend to act in the interest of the financial and not the productive sectors of the economy. They look at the economy from a worldview that does not care as much about employment as it does about inflation, because that is the major concern of the bondholders and the bankers. And so it's a very fundamental, deep problem, what has happened in the last 20 to 30 years with the increasing power of the financial sector and the central banks increasingly representing the power of of this large, overgrown financial sector rather than the interests of the public. So I'm glad you asked that question.
Thank you.
Associate Professor Anette Pajuste, Associate Professor at Riga Business School. My question is to Mark Weisbrot. So you mentioned that how Latvia overcame the crisis was wrong. So going back to 2008, end of 2008, what would you do exactly differently? And how can you be sure that, let's say, if there was devaluation, that the impact on the economy would be different than it was, as we saw in your graphs?
Okay, yes, I would have said, when the economy went into recession, instead of this massive fiscal consolidation, which took place in 2008 and 2009, that shrank the economy. This was, when I was here, the government acknowledged that's actually what they were doing. Okay, that's how internal devaluation worked. I would have gone in the opposite direction, the way the United States did, for example, and responded with a fiscal stimulus. And if that meant letting the currency peg go, then that would have been okay too, because that would have been better than losing a quarter of your economy and 20% of your employment. And how do I know that would be better? We have experience of devaluations. Now, devaluations do have often contractionary effects, and they can be significant. But if you look at the worst devaluations of the last 15, 20 years, nothing came close to what you saw in Latvia. In Argentina, they lost 6% of GDP after the devaluation, and then they grew. They've grown over 90% since then. Okay, very fast recovery. But the devaluation itself only caused a 6% loss, and that was with a default on $95 billion worth of debt, which collapsed the entire financial system of the country. And so 6% is what they lost as a result of all of that. Okay, Mexico's devaluation also about 5 or 6%. Brazil, Russia, 1998. A few percent of GDP, nothing like what you had here. So I think it's very hard to find an example where a devaluation caused the kind of losses that this country suffered in order to do what they call an internal devaluation.
Mr. Hockett.
Yes, I just want to quote shortly on your comments concerning the independence of central bank. That's one of the very few positions where we disagree totally. And I'm not convinced by your remarks on that. You focused on a space of 20, 30 years. I focus on that space, also a little bit more in the past concerning special history of our country, currency history. I'm convinced that central bank autonomy is one of the basic points, and if you analyze the currency developments before the monetary union we had, then have a look to the devaluation of the lira, of the franc, and so on. What was about these central banks? They were governmental influenced, and it was only achieved in the Treaty of Maastricht that the central banks should become independent, and then it worked. It worked, my dear. That must not exclude that there are examples where it did not work, but one thing is sure, the very close influence of the government to the central bank policy has mostly failed in respect to that who had to suffer most from it. That was the people with their savings. That's it. Thank you, sir.
Inna Delapeka, Rīgas Tradiņu universitāte. Mans jautājums būs tāds ļoti īsi. Ja? Pēc manām domām mums ir izveidots diezgan neefektīvs valsts pārvaldes sektors un arī nekonkurējošs.
Pirmais, ka neoperēt ar absolūtiem skaitļiem, bet operēt ar to, kādu daļu no koprodukta sastāvda Latvijas parāds prioritāri. Tas ir atcerēties to, ka Maastrichtas kritērija un vispārīgi ir daļskaitļi, nevis tikai skaitītājs. Kad palielinot saucēju, tas, kas notika teknējos gados, un tas ir objektīvi pareizi, kas tika parādīts šeit, kad tā sliktā Kalvīša valdība ievērojami samazināja šo daļskaitu. Un uzdevums fiskālās disciplīnas likumā, tas pirmais punkts, ko mēs domājam, ka vajadzētu samazināt šo daļskaitu, attīstoties. Un otrs, ka ir jāņem vērā Latvijas specifisko situāciju Eiropas Savienībā. Mēs esam Eiropas Savienības tirgus daļa, un šajā tirgu visiem ražošanas faktoriem, viņu cenām ir jāizlīdzinās. Tā skaitā darbspēkam, tā skaitā visam citām. Nevar mākslīgi pieņemot kaut kāds likums bremzēt šo procesu. Mākslīgi bremzēt. Viņš var nepieaugt uzreiz, bet nevajag speciāli pūlēties, lai speciāli būtu sliktāk. Un tādēļ šos rādītājus vajadzētu samērot ar to, ka Latvija tuvojās Eiropas vidējam līmenim. Tāpēc 2 gadu atpakaļ, kad mēs runājam ar valdību, mēs piedāvājam, ka sākumā šīs pieļaujamie parametri ir augstāki, aizņemties var vairāk, lai šajā laikā aizņemoties var straujāk attīstīties un audzēt šo daļskaitļu saucēju, respektīvi iekšzemes koproduktu, nebaidoties, kad ekonomika pārkarstīs. Un otrajā etapā, tā kā jūs tuvojoties vidējām, tad jūs samazināt un tad jūs ievērojat to disciplīnu, kāda ir spēkā Eiropā kopumā. Tad šie 2 principi, vai viņi pieņemam, un vai tādā veidā to fiskālā disciplīnas likumu var pieņemt, vai varbūt viņi vispār var.
Jā. Es saprotu jūsu pieeju, jūsu pozīciju paziņojumu. Es saprotu, ka jūs gaidāt komentāru no ziņotājiem, jā? Tad mēs sagaidīsim tulkojumu beigās, droši vien. Okay. Tad kas atbildēs uz šo gāru jautājumu?
Jā. Domāju, ka noteikti šī diskusija par to, ka nepieciešama fiskālā disciplīna ilgtermiņā ir ļoti pareizi. Es domāju, ka ik viens, kas vēro, piemēram, tādēļ Grieķijā, visiem ir skaidrs, ka mums nākotnē būs jāuzmanās ar valstu deficītu. Bet vienlaikus, es domāju, ka ir pārāk sarežģīta šī situācija būtu ietverama vienā likumā. Es domāju, ka mums pagaidām ir jānorāda, mums ir labāk jāstāv daudz debatas par to, ko mēs precīzi darām, bet atstāt vienu konkrētu likumu ietveros ir, manuprāt, pārāk sarežģīta šobrīd.
Vēl komentārs būs ziņotājiem? Vai Markam? Kristianam? Jā. Jau bija tāds, un es priekš ieklāsies, ka mums patiešām bija interesanti, un varbūt arī vajadzēja jūs nākamā reize veicināt pie paneles, lai es šo pozīciju plašāk izklāstītu, ka tas tiešām ir gan ļoti respektējami, gan arī interesanti pēc būtības. Bet komentāri vairs nebūs. Jautājumi. Lūdzu.
Sergejs Ļikievičs, Ventspils augstskola, jautājums Ošmanikam. Jūs ļoti labi aprakstījat krīzes cēloņus, un, kā jūs saprotiet, process ir pietiekami ilgs. Sākas ar to, ka fiksējam latu, inflācija bija 10%, eirozona tur bija 3%, ar laiku kurs rate aizgāja no pašas power parity, sākas negatīva tirdzniecības balanse, negatīva maksājuma bilance, pēc tam vienīgais ceļš, kā neveidojot parādu, to seikt, ir foreign direct investments, un sākas visas tā dziesma, par kuru jūs teicat. Kur es redzu vienu no problēmu? Ekonomikas ministrijas ietvaros tas scenārijs, ka FDI var pagriezties, tika apspriests vēl 2005. Gadā, kad veidojas iepriekšējais Nacionālās attīstības plāns. Es biju pie tas sadaļas, ka esošas situācijas analīzē, un speciālisti to redzēja. Tas, kas notika 2000. Gadā, kad no 24. septembra līdz 31. decembrim izņēma 2 miljārdus, tas jau bija paredzēts. Bet man ir jautājums tāds. Mēs šeit spriežam, mēs šeit runājam, mēs varam izteikt kaut kādas derīgas idejas, bet derīgas idejas bija izteiktas vēl 2005. Gadā, kur diagnoze speciālistu aprindas bija pietiekami labi identificēta. Jautājums ir tāds, kāpēc ir tā starpība starp speciālistu viedokli un reālām rīcībām? Kur ir tas pārravums un kur jūs redzat to iemeslu, kāpēc situācija notiek citādi, nekā to rekomendē speciālisti pēc teorijas? Kur jūs redzat pārravumu?
Es domāju, ka problēma ir tajā, ka ekonomika ir sarežģīta lieta. Es arī mēģināju sākumā teikt, ka viedokļi arī šā krīzes un burbuļu laikā bija dažādi. Un bija viedokļi par to, piemēram, ka mēs vienkārši vērojam to, ka kapitāls no bagātajām valstīm nāk uz nabagajām, un tas ir pozitīvi. Tas ir, kādēļ mums ir, piemēram, eiro. Kāpēc mums ir eiro? Lai mēs dabūtu ārvalstu investīcijas. Respektīvi, mēs dabūtu naudu no ārzemēm, ne? Tāpēc mēs ieviešam eiro. Un mēs domājam, ka tas ir labi. Tāpēc, kad mums būs ārvalstu investīcijas un būs izaugsmes, un mēs varam padarīt arī izlasītas, esmu pārliecināts. Un vai tad tas ir slikti? Un kādos apstākļos tas ir slikti? Kā tas ir slikti? Es domāju, ka tas ir pārāk sarežģīti viss. Un es domāju, ka mēs kā cilvēki neaptveram īsti, tā filozofiski skatoties procesus, un reizēm mēs arī kļūdamies kā cilvēki. Un jautājums, ko varbūt, Keynes, viens lielajiem ekonomistiem viņš teica, jautājums ir par to, vai mēs nepārtraukti atrodamies tādā burbuļu stāvoklī vai tādā depresijas stāvoklī. Un tā ir faktiski īstā izvēle. Mēs nevaram cerēt, ka mēs uzbūvēsim perfektu ekonomiku. Mēs jau cerējām jaunībā, es atceros, vai ne? Mēs cerējām sociālismu uzbūvēt perfektu ekonomiku, kur viss būs sakārtots, izdomāts, norganizēts, notiks pareizi. Bet cilvēku prāts nespēja viņu aptvert. Cilvēks nespēja izkalkulēt sociālismu ekonomiku ar visu valsts plānu komiteju. Cilvēku prāts noteikti nespēja aptvert to, kas notiek šobrīd kapitālismu ekonomikā Latvijā. Labākais, uz ko mēs varam cerēt, ir, ja tas ir burbulis, censties viņu ierobežot un pamanīt. Ja viņš sprākst, ja viņš ir izrādījies nevis izaugsme, nevis izlīdzināšanās ar Eiropu, kā mēs cerējām, šī burbuļu laikā, un viņš sprākst, mēģināt izdarīt to sprādzienu tā, lai minimāli ciestu darba vietas, un lai mēs gūtu maksimālu labumu un varētu no sākuma atsākt ekonomikas izaugsmi. Uzdevums ir noteikti, piemēram, spēcināt banku sektoru, Bankas ir tās, kas no vienas puses izdod kredītus, kas rada burbuļus, kas ir slikti, bet no otras puses ir organizācijas, kas izsniedz kredītus, lai mēs tālāk augtu, kas ir labi. Un, ja mēs atrisinām burbuļus, mums vienmēr jādomā, kā mēs izveidojam banku sektoru, kurš izsniedz no jauna kredītus. Kas ir pareizās politikas sprākstot burbuļu, kā mēs nonākam pie banku sektora, kas nodrošina tālāk izaugsmi, kā mēs dabūjam spēcīgas bankas. Šie ir, es domāju, tādi svarīgi jautājumi, bet es nemēģinātu teikt, ka mēs varam tā droši paredzēt nākošo burbuli, ka būs nākšais burbulis, ka mēs zināsim, ka viņš ir, ka tas ir burbulis, nevis konverģents ar Eiropu, piemēram, vai kas tam līdzīgs. Tas nenotiek.
Paldies. Mūsu saruna tuvojas beigām, man ir jau signāli, ka auditorija ir nogurusi. Tomēr vēl pa vienam varbūt jautājumam, tātad no zāles, kas vēl gribētu uzdot jautājumu, pēc tam es noslēgšu mūsu sarunu. Lūdzu, vai ir jautājumi?
Mikrofonu.
Vai Eglišaknes pareizi? Paldies.
Paldies, Jānis Iglīts, viens vēl sāksko, atgriežoties nedaudz atpakaļ pie tās diskusijas par demokrātiju. Un Pimenovu kungu ievadvārdiem mūsu visiem, jūs teicāt, ka pirms gada vai cik tad jūs tikāties Finanšu ministrijā un Viņķels kundze, jūs kolēģi bija toreiz tikai deputāte, tagad viņa ir ministre. Es domāju, ka arī pamatoties savu parlamentāro pieredzi, mums valsts lielākā problēma ir tā, ka parlamentārā republikā parlaments nav galvenais likumdevēja orgāns. Ja? Tad mēs skatāmies uz Latvijas banku, uz ministru, uz vēl kādām iestādēm, kā uz visu parlamentu stāvošām. Un kamēr šī atšķirība būs, tikmēr būs tās diskusijas. Un Latvijas bankas pārstāvis, kad jautāja, ko vajadzēja darīt, ir 3. punkts likumā par Latvijas banku. Latvijas bankas galvenais mērķis ir cenu stabilitāte valstī.
Tas ir komentārs, bet jautājumu nebūs. Labi, ir jautājums. Paldies jums, Egliša kungs. Jautājums. Neredz. Paldies. Līdz ar to es pateicos ziņotājiem. Es gribētu pateikties arī tiem, kas joprojām atrodas mūsu auditorijā. Noslēgumā es gribētu pateikt ļoti īsi ko. Ka saruna ir ļoti nopietna. Es atzīšu, ka es ne visu sapratu. Kaut esmu jau dzīvi šajā temata, bet tomēr es nesapratu, tāpēc es ceru, ka Friedricha Eberta fonds mums palīdzēs izdot tekstu krājumu, lai visi interesanti Latvijā un ārpus tās varētu tomēr papētīt šo materiālu ļoti nopietni ar lielu grafu diagrammu skaitu, un līdz ar to tās būs patiešām nopietni solis komunikācijas ne tikai starp politiķiem un ekonomistiem, bet arī starp valsti un sabiedrību. Es domāju, ka tas ir ļoti svarīgi. Tas ir pirmais. Un pēdējais, ko es gribētu pateikt, Pilsakam jau kādi solījumi vai ne?
First of all, it is extremely dangerous to give any promises in any country in the world, particularly Latvia. So I don't do that. And I would like to thank all the speakers from the audience first, because you are great. You are great. You gave a good, let's say, objective to talk about. So the speakers of the audience made the audience discussion as well very, very fruitful. Thank you very much for all of that. Thank you very much for your initiative. Thank you very much, Ms. Hanovs, for the organization, and Mrs. Gorbachev, and others whose name I don't know. Yes, we should continue the debates. Public debates are always very important. I'm not so sure whether we should print everything that has been said. This is a kind of workshop. In the workshop, there is a floor. On the floor, you can sometimes pick up some old pieces of wood. I think we leave it like that and continue. And if there is another meeting, we should consider from the very beginning to think of a broader distribution. Thank you very much, Member of Parliament. And my last question was to the Member of Parliament, but now we are over time, and I would like to stop here. Next time we start with the Members of Parliament. Thank you very much.
Thank you. But before we leave, before we just pass the agenda, pirms mēs dosim iespēju žurnālistiem uzdot jautājumus, mums ir nobeguši